Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the WACO meeting this morning. As usual, we've got a terrific program, and I know all of us are going to look forward to and gain a lot from the presentations today. It's looks like it's going to be a great day in Southern California. I was hoping a few days ago we were going to get some rain, but it sort of bypassed us. So we just have to continue the momentum of an inadequate water supply, but we're going to make the best of it. So with that, I'd like to introduce Gary Kurtz from Molten Miguel Water that will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Gary?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, at this time, it's an opportunity for those that are new to the WACO meeting, haven't been here for a while. Any new faces or reintroductions?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Palmer. I'm formerly with Congressman John Campbell, but I'm now the new Public Affairs Field Coordinator for the California Special Districts Association. So I'm just getting started. I'll be based here in Huntington Beach, but I'll be a local point of contact for all CSDA activities. And if there's anything we can do to assist you, please let us know.
Good. And I know we will hear from him in our future meetings. Anyone else that'd like to introduce themselves? One other introduction, as we know, Darcy is moving on to other aspects of the water industry. This will be her last meeting as part of MODOC, but I'm certain we will see her in the future in connection with her new endeavor. And again, Darcy is so instrumental in putting together, along with others, the WACO program. So we're certainly going to miss her great talent, but we have some good people that will fill in, and we can certainly continue. And we certainly wish you well. One thing about the water industry, when someone leaves, it's not like we're not going to see them again. We just may see them in a different setting. So they never go away. They just yeah, so anyways, thanks. Thank you. As usual, very important to us. There's a lot on the MWD agenda. And Larry, there he is.
I didn't know it was going to be this early.
You're waiting for some important possible addition?
I'm going to have the big boys talk first. You know, those LAFCO folks or the Aqua folks, whatever. Ms. Ackerman is away, so you get the B team this morning. The Met report comes to you kind of as a Cracker Barrel philosopher's perspective. It's important for you all to remember, I believe, when you're out in the community and people ask you questions about, what's going on, that Southern California gets about 30% of its water from Northern California. Important to know that. About 25% comes off the Colorado River. 2013 was the driest year on record. 2014 was the hottest year on record. So as the man said, if you're feeling hot and thirsty, you're right. This year, we have the lowest snowpack on record. Remember, when you're in the community, to share with those folks the fact that the snowpack is indeed our water savings account. That when spring comes, that snow is supposed to melt to answer our water needs. And when it's not there, we have to go to other sources. Next week, probably on Tuesday, Metropolitan will be taking a vote on allocations. It's important we understand the disparity between allocations and rationing. Those of you who have been through rationing know that means that's all you get. Allocations mean that's all you should get, but if you want more, it's available. In this case, somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000 an acre foot, roughly. So there is a penalty phase there that makes you want to pay attention to staying within the allocation. The reason we're going to allocations is because we don't know where we are. No one knows where we are on the drought. Some people say we're in 8 years out of 10 in the drought. Others have different numbers. It depends on whether you talk about the basin or the coast. At any rate, by reducing our demands and by conserving where we can stretch the water supplies that we have. What have we been doing? Well, we've been trying to expand our outreach by talking to media for free media, and we've been buying media at Met. Last year, in the last 20 years, we've spent $12 billion to respond to demand, to add to conservation, and develop more flexible water supplies. When you hear about Met dollars, remember, they don't get them anyplace else but out of your pocket. We are the ratepayers that provide Met this money, so it's our investment, yours and the people in the community. This year, we'll be spending $100 million on conservation. Forgive me. A lot of it on turf, others rebates, and things of that nature. When you go back to 1990, and again, I ask you to tell this to our friends and neighbors in the community. When you go back to 1990 and look at the population in Southern California, we've added 5 million people. 5 million people is almost the population of Orange County and San Diego County. If you're listening to the news or reading the newspaper, you'll find out that Israel is a country that has had a lot of importance in recent news. 5 million is almost the size of that country. And we've added that in Southern California since 1990, yet because of the programs we've talked about, we use less water. We've added Diamond Valley Lake and the inland feeder, another $4 billion worth of investment that came out of your pockets, but look what it's enabled us to do. It's enabled us to be standing here saying, gee whiz, what are we going to do now? Because our customers expect that water to come out of the tap when you turn it on, because you and others like you have done such a good job of making that happen. We've added in that period of time 400,000 acre feet of groundwater through cleanup and recycling, a lot of it local regional projects, and about 800,000 acre feet through conservation. That's what we've been doing. So people say, what are you doing? Tell them what we've been doing and how you've been leading the way in that regard. I would like to close with another thought, and actually two. I made kind of a personal commitment that said anytime I had water buffaloes and water lilies in the room, I would remind you that it's important that every time we have a meeting, you try to figure out how we can advance the repair of the Delta. We've got to get those tunnels in if we're going to actually protect that allocation out of the State Water Project. And lastly, when I see the governor being interviewed and the lady says, 80% of the water goes to agriculture, what are you doing about that? I get a little unhappy. It's 80% of the developed water. And we're at a 20% allocation from the State Water Project, and it's bringing a tear to my glass eye. But the farmers have been at a zero allocation for the past 2 years. So the farmers are being asked to make a change, the farmers are being asked to adjust, the people in our neighborhoods are being asked to make a change, they're being asked to adjust. Why, oh why, can't we figure out some way to get some of that other 40% that goes to the environment and to the ocean? There's a lot of water there that's just rolling out under the Golden Gate every year. And please, don't send me the notes. I do want clean water. I do want clean air. I have a new granddaughter. I want her to have the same opportunities we've had. But that is the Met report. If we'd had this meeting after Tuesday, we'd be a whole lot smarter. So stay tuned. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot, Larry. As we all know, the governor's taken a personal interest in water, and he's had various directives over the past 6 months and to try and address this drought emergency that we're in. And we have Joe Berg from the MODOC, who's been a WACO attendee for a long period of time, is going to give an update on what the governor's efforts are and how we're going to work with this new player in the water supply field.
All right, good morning. On April 1st, the governor released his executive order, and it's no joke. He's really getting serious about addressing the drought. So by way just of a little bit of background, there have already been 2 executive orders, or pardon me, emergency regulations. The first one was adopted last year by the state board. More recently, another one was adopted. Those 2 emergency regs have started to really ramp up the requirements for using water more efficiently. The second order is just now going into effect. So it's been through the state board hearing process, the adoption process, and through administrative law, and it's now going to become effective. So just as we're getting to that point of that second emergency reg becoming effective, we're now faced with a whole nother set of new regulations that are going to be required to be implemented. The executive order focused on several different areas. First and foremost, and what's probably going to be implemented first, is the water savings activities. There's also additional enforcement of water waste requirements, investments in new technologies, and streamlining government response. There are 31 different actions in the executive order, and those actions are all assigned to various different state agencies. So we've got the State Water Resources Control Board, the California Energy Commission, the Department of Water Resources, all have assignments in this process. And for those 31 different activities to be implemented, they're required to go through each of those state agencies' adoption approaches. So it starts with a proposal that is then vetted through a public hearing. That's then adopted by the agency, and then it is sent to the Office of Administrative Law. And once it's approved there, there's a time frame that it then must be implemented. So there are some folks out there that feel that this executive order went into effect immediately, and that's not really true. There's going to be processes that have to be gone through before they can actually become effective. We need time to get ourselves prepared and activities in place before we can actually start implementing them. So just earlier this week, the State Water Resources Control Board was first out of the gate in terms of providing fact sheets as well as frameworks for the water use efficiency activities. Specifically, the 25% mandatory reduction for urban water use is probably the item that's getting the most attention by us as water agencies. We're looking at the framework. It does provide for a sliding scale, starting with a 10% reduction for agencies that have a very low residential gallons per capita day. And then at the high end, it goes up to 35% mandatory reduction for agencies that have very high residential GPCDs. And so in Orange County, we actually have agencies in all 4 of those categories. So right now, I've been working with the agencies to craft a comment letter that we will be submitting to the state board on Monday. I know that many of the retail water agencies management are working on letters of their own. We're looking for a number of things that would help the state still achieve that average statewide 25% reduction, but at the same time make it a little bit more equitable for agencies within the state. The time frame for the state board's activities, our notice of announcing release of draft will be released on the 17th. So between now and Monday, we're going to be giving our preliminary comments. The state board will digest those, update what their proposal is, and release the final proposal on the 17th. So we'll actually have 2 opportunities for comment. We know that because of this being kind of an emergency process, that the state board is not looking for complaining. They're really looking for very specific constructive recommendations that can be made to the process. So we're having to get past that initial gut reaction that this is not right, we need to do it differently, but really trying to work with them to be very constructive and specific in our recommendations. So the rulemaking formal notice will go out April 28th. The board hearing and adoption will be on May 5th. After the adoption, it'll go to the Office of Administrative Law. That's usually a pretty quick turnaround. And then we'll have a certain number of days to get everything in place to actually implement it. So the water conservation activities are getting in place. A couple of specific items on, and my talk this morning is really just focusing on the water conservation activities. There are many other things in the regulation that deal with streamlined permitting, fire protection, things of that nature. So I'll leave you to look at the executive order. I do have copies of it over at the table here if you'd like to grab one before you leave. A couple of other things to note on the water conservation part. There is item number 8 in the executive order focuses on rate structures and financial penalties and that sort of thing. They're not ready to begin that process. That's going to be handled through a completely separate process, and we're poised to monitor and participate in that as it comes up. A couple of other things besides the 25% that is in the existing framework are irrigation of street medians with potable water. And really this item came about because there's a recognition that turf grass in a street median is not a recreational use of turf. And so that can become a great opportunity for local agencies and jurisdictions to say, hey, we're going to turn off the water to our street medians. If there's trees in it, we're going to keep watering those trees because we don't want to lose the trees, but the turf grass will brown up, go dormant, and that'll be an opportunity for us to say, this is what we're doing to respond to the drought. They're very highly visible areas, and we're going to hope that the public will consider doing something similar themselves. So it's an opportunity to set an example. If a city does not want to just turn it off and let it sit, we do have turf removal rebates that are available to assist with converting that turf-based street median over to a California-friendly street median, so that's an option to consider. Another one is in new development. As we get into droughts, the public usually, there's an outcry that says, you're asking me to conserve water, yet you're allowing this new development to take place over here. And so what are you doing there? And one of the items the state board has instituted is that for new homes, you cannot irrigate it with overhead spray irrigation. Any irrigation needs to take place using micro irrigation or drip irrigation, which is the irrigation technologies over the last 20 years have come a long, long way. And those are all very much viable irrigation techniques that really increase the efficiency of how the water is applied to the landscape. Goes a long ways to reducing the runoff as well. So that's another item that's coming up for us. Just also so I make sure I hit the high points. You may have seen earlier this week in the news that the California Energy Commission, I said state board was first out of the gate. Well, I thought they were, but actually the California Energy Commission adopted new plumbing fixture flow standards for faucets, toilets, urinals. Unfortunately, they did not include shower heads, and I'm a little baffled as to why that is the case. Right now, the flow standard for shower heads is 2.5 gallons per minute. You can comfortably get down to 2 gallons per minute, and the difference happens to be 20% reduction. So we're still working on getting that established. I want to make sure that we address the comfort issue with that low a flow rate on shower heads. A pressure regulating head is ideal because the water flows out, melts onto your body. It's a much more comfortable shower. If it's a flow restricting head, I don't like that because the water just blasts you and you don't get a comfortable shower. So before we get to that 2 gallons per minute mark, we need to make sure we address issues like that as well as scalding. So the item number 3 on the list is that the Department of Water Resources, in partnership with agencies throughout the state, will remove 50 million square feet of turf grass. And while that may seem like a lot of turf grass, just have you know that in Orange County alone this year, we're on schedule to remove 10 million square feet of turf grass. So 20% of that statewide goal is coming out of Orange County alone through the financial support offered by the Metropolitan Water District. Now, if you look at the Met-wide area, they're going to be over 50 million square feet. So that 50 million is really kind of a drop in the bucket. So some of these items are quite tedious and will be difficult for us. Other items are going to be a little easier. So with that, I think I'd be happy to respond to questions.
One question.
Give us a clue of what the consequences are if we do not achieve.
Good question. The existing penalties, and there are penalties now that the state board is looking at for water agencies for noncompliance, but there's also provisions that allow water agencies to penalize their consumers, and that's going to be a choice thing. You can choose to do your enforcement however you'd like. Citations are perfectly acceptable. If you want to go to the extreme of penalties, that is an option. So that's from the water agency perspective to the consumer. From the state board to the retail water agency, there's a potential for up to a $10,000 fine per day for noncompliance. And there will be expanded monthly reporting. We've already been doing monthly reporting to the state board. That's going to be expanded to include descriptions of what we're doing to engage the customers, to further define what our commercial, industrial, and institutional water use is. So this is a serious situation that we really do need to pay attention to. We're in a state of emergency that is no longer accommodated from a voluntary perspective. So I'm very pleased to see the media pickup that we've seen, and I'm sure that our consumers will respond, but we need to be out there helping them along.
What about golf courses?
Golf courses are still going to be, the 25%, and that's a statewide 25%, is it cuts across all consumer classes. Water agencies do have the ability to emphasize what particular area or type of consumer they want to encourage the most, but so golf courses would be needed to respond as well. One clarification on that, though, is if it's irrigated with recycled water, recycled water use is exempt from this provision, as is turf-based street medians that are irrigated with recycled water. That's exempt as well.
The other thing is most controllers, sprinkler controllers, you're talking about talking to people, have a percentage reduction on them. And I went out and set my own, for example, right away, 70%.
Yes.
And I'm watching the plants and don't see any difference yet.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's something that people can do, and that's a big usage, up to 50% of people listen to the media.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point of clarification. In Orange County, through the Water Use Efficiency Master Plan we adopted about 1.5 years ago, we found that 50% of our overall water use in Orange County is applied to our urban landscapes. And so if there were an area to emphasize, it would be in the landscape, that's for sure. One other thing, and I'm really glad you brought this up, is that percent adjust feature on your irrigation timers. MODOC, in partnership with Metropolitan and the Department of Water Resources, has developed what we call the California Sprinkler Adjustment Notification System. And that system provides you either a weekly email or a monthly email that tells you, based on your zip code, what you should put your percentage at. And so instead of having to go to the Metropolitan website and pull the number off of the website, we're pushing that information out to you via an email. So if you go to CSAN's acronym, California Sprinkler Adjustment Notification System.net, you can sign up to receive that monthly email. in addition to that percentage number, there's also a list of recommendations that fall on other areas that you can save water, educational pieces. So it's more than just that percent adjust. It's a whole educational campaign. And that email is customized to each retail water agency. It includes your logo. You do have the ability to put customized messaging. Right now it's being implemented on a countywide basis, so the messaging is countywide relevant. So, another question back here.
Yeah, real fast. We have GWR water here. We
Yes.
utilize that obviously in our aquifer, et cetera. Do we get any credit at all in this percentage?
And I'm really glad you brought that up. Not right now. However, that is probably the single most important comment that MODOC and many of the groundwater basin agencies are making. Just yesterday, I had a discussion with Eric Oppenheimer at the State Water Resources Control Board, and he and I discussed a very specific calculation that could be used to give an indirect potable reuse credit for agencies. Because recycled water use is such a priority for the state, it makes no sense to penalize an agency that's developed an IPR type project. And if other agencies are seeing that we're going to get a credit, it's really just going to push more agencies into that direction. So we're actually pretty optimistic right now that that will become a credit for us.
Well, thanks, Joe, for the great report. And we all know these regulations are changing by the week. And so there's a lot going on, and I know we're going to hear a lot more on this issue. Okay, any questions or comments before we get into our featured speaker for today? Okay, as you know, we spend a lot of time talking about water supply conditions from for the State Water Project, and they're pretty dim. And we also know that in looking at the mix of water supplies, we're counting a lot on Colorado River water supplies to help bridge the gap to some extent. So today we're going to get a great presentation on what the Colorado water supply picture looks like. So sort of the second part of our main sources of supply. We're real fortunate to have the executive director of the Colorado River Board of California. And I know our speaker will explain what this board does in great detail. Our speaker is extremely qualified to talk about the Colorado River issues, both in terms of the national perspective and the local perspective. And at the federal level, she was counsel to the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and also overseeing the Senate Subcommittee on Water and Power. At the state level, she was general counsel to the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, and also she has extensive experience in a private law practice on natural resource issues. And she received her degree from Stanford, so from an education perspective, she's local. And she also received her law degree from the University of Iowa School of Law, so she's an attorney. So we know we're going to get a lot of good detailed information. It's sort of the transition on this. I just had a little sidebar conversation, and she heard about all the woes we have with the State Water Project, and I said, well, maybe you'll have some positive news on the Colorado River side, but we'll find out if any exists in that area. So please join us in welcoming Tanya to WACO.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Again, my name is Tanya Trujillo. I am the Executive Director of the Colorado River Board of California. I'm going to provide a little bit of background about exactly what the Colorado River Board of California is, and then I will give you an overview of how California uses Colorado River water. We know it's an important source for the municipal areas here in Southern California, but also a significant agricultural component to our Colorado River water use. And then I want to focus on some of the interstate issues that are going on, because that's my main job, is interacting with our sister states on the Colorado River and really ensuring that that source of water remains viable for our state and our neighboring states. So again, appreciate the opportunity to be here. I prefer an informal kind of a context, so please raise your hands or shout out questions if there are any, and hopefully we can have a good dialogue. So the other preview is, I appreciate that the water conditions here in California are extremely serious. Our drought is extremely serious, unprecedented. It was unprecedented a year ago, and now we're another year into it. And my focus is going to be really on the other drought that we have impacting us on the Colorado River. So the Colorado River Board was established by the state of California, by the legislature, back in 1937, so we're a little over 75 years old. We are a board, and our board's mission is to protect the interests, rights of the state of California, its agencies and citizens, in the water and power resources of the Colorado River system. So my job is representing the state of California and all of you who utilize water from the Colorado River system, and again, to interact with our sister states, similar agencies in other states, and the federal agencies that are a big part of the water management system on the Colorado River. Our board members are designated by statute. We have 3 agricultural agencies who have seats on the board. That's the Palo Verde Irrigation District, the Imperial Irrigation District, and the Coachella Valley Water District, who also has a significant domestic supply associated with their system as well. And then on the municipal side, by statute, we have representation from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and then 2 of their large member agencies. The Los Angeles Department of Water and Power is specifically named as a board member, and the San Diego County Water Authority is also a board member. We have the state of California as board members through the Department of Water Resources and the Fish and Wildlife Service. So they sit with our local agencies and help us with respect to our management. And we have 2 designated members of the public who are appointed by the governor to sit with us on our board. The origin of the Colorado River Board of California really goes back to the Colorado River Compact, which was an agreement reached in 1922, an interstate agreement amongst 7 states who share the waters of the Colorado River. And the agreement was reached in 1922 and has essentially remained unchanged. The agreement itself has remained the same as it was back then. But we have had significant federal statutes that have interpreted the compact, and we have also had many agreements among the states that have helped guide our water management actions throughout the past several decades. I am a lawyer. I confess that up front, and but my entire career has been working side by side with engineers, hydrologists, biologists, economists, sociologists, to really understand the integrated nature between water law issues, legal issues, and the real world management that we have to deal with, the interaction of surface water and groundwater, the technical nature of how our systems are put together. And on the Colorado River, Congress has had a lot to do with how things are set up. And going back to 1928, the waters of the Colorado River system were divided amongst the lower basin states of California, Arizona, and Nevada, and the upper basin states, which are New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah, divided water amongst themselves without the help of Congress in a compact in 1948. So 20 years later, they reached their allocation. There has also been significant litigation on the lower Colorado River. The Supreme Court was reviewing disputes between Arizona and California for a couple of decades, and back in 1964 reached a decree that solidified essentially the congressional allocations that were made in 28. And we have been living under that 1964 decree since that time, and that really guides a lot of the actions that we have on the Colorado River. And then in 1968, we had another congressional act that really authorized the last major project on the Colorado River, which was Arizona's Central Arizona project. And based on that authorization, really set into motion the reality that we were going to have to be dealing with a very limited supply of water. Essentially, we all of the states had taken it up with respect to their plans for utilization of Colorado River water. So we have been working to manage the resources since that time and really think of creative ways to develop water, share water, expand its uses as much as possible. And then last but not least, I want to definitely acknowledge that it is an international river. So we have a treaty with Mexico to allocate the water on the Colorado River. That was back in 1944 and requires the United States deliver 1.5 million acre feet of water a year to Mexico, which we have done successfully since that time. And I'll go into a little more detail about some of the more creative agreements that we've been working on with Mexico recently to really acknowledge that they are one of the water users on the river, and we need to try to share that creative spirit that we have amongst the basin states with our Mexican counterparts. So that's the general overview of where we are, and the water supply again was allocated in the upper basin. Their half of the Colorado River starts with a potential allocation of 7.5 million acre feet. The lower basin states also have 7.5 million acre feet, plus the ability to develop an additional million acre feet, which we have done so. And then Mexico again has 1.5 million. The upper basin states allocated on a percentage basis amongst themselves the ability to develop the water that's available to develop, which is not based on a fixed number, but they determine on a project-by-project basis in what's called a hydrologic determination how much water they think is available to develop. The most recent hydrologic determination was in a few years ago in connection with authorization of a large project for the Navajo Nation in New Mexico, and since that time they've been living within that original or that framework for that project. And in the lower basin we have the fixed allocation amounts. So we're different. We're on the same river, but we have different systems of how we've divided up the water amongst the states. California has the largest allocation of 4.4 million acre feet. Arizona has 2.8 million acre feet, and Nevada has 300,000 acre feet. And since the 20s, we have been living with these allocations. I should point out that the compact and the statutes and the agreements amongst the states provide that In the lower basin, if some of the states are not using their full allocation, it is acceptable for other states to utilize that unused apportionment. And that's in fact what California had been doing for several decades while Arizona and Nevada were growing and utilizing more water. So the unused apportionment was put to good use here in California. In general, we know the water of the Colorado River is important here in California, but also serving over 35 million people throughout the basin. Los Angeles and San Diego, of course, but Las Vegas, Nevada, Phoenix, Arizona, Denver, Colorado, Salt Lake City, Utah, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And as you can see, many of the largest population centers, including right here where we are technically outside of the basin, and water is transported from the basin to those locations. And it's not just a California phenomenon. The other states have a similar system where they utilize the water for their large municipal areas. But also a significant source of water for irrigation. Over 5.5 million acres are irrigated, and tremendous hydropower resource. So much of the power in both basins, the upper basin and the lower basin, comes from the major hydropower facilities operated primarily by the Bureau of Reclamation on the system, and a really important source of the renewable energy supply that currently exists in our country. The river also provides significant habitat and recreational opportunities throughout the basin, and serves water to over 22 recognized tribes. So it's a complex and very important source of water for our nation. 7 states, that's 7 states' congressional offices that are involved in all of the matters of the Colorado River, and significant authority with respect to how the management goes forward. So to focus just more specifically on California's situation and California's use of the Colorado River, again, this is the map showing the areas that I described earlier and where our board members in particular are located. There are additional water uses beyond just the members that sit on our board, additional irrigation along the river, and additional municipal areas throughout. So we have the Palo Verde Irrigation District there on the river in the green, and Imperial Irrigation District, which is the largest irrigation district in the country. The water allocation for Imperial Irrigation District is 3.1 million acre feet. There is no irrigation district in the country that has a greater allocation than that. The Coachella Valley Irrigation District utilizes about 330,000 acre feet, and has an interesting mix of urban and agricultural uses in their district. And then the municipal area, again, the largest supplier of municipal water is the Metropolitan Water District, and representing over 19 million people in the area. So just to highlight some of those facts and figures, I would just maybe note one of the hot topics with respect to the fish and wildlife habitat issue that is connected to Colorado River is the Salton Sea. And there have been some recent proceedings at the State Water Control Board relating to the Salton Sea, and that notwithstanding the fact that we have drought on both the Colorado River system and the state of California, we also have looming potential environmental concerns associated with what's going on down in the Salton Sea, which is California's largest reservoir, largest lake, and trying to address, always juggling a number of difficult items at any moment in time. So I know you have seen this slide before. It comes from, some of the Metropolitan Water District presentations, but just kind of provides a perspective of the importance of the Colorado River supply to the municipal areas in Southern California. And these are the capacities that we have from the different systems. Obviously, in the years like the past 2 years, we know that the state water project allocation has not been 2 million acre feet. We had 5% last year and 20% this year. And then the Los Angeles Aqueduct also has had record low delivery levels, not only associated with the drought, but also from some of the regulatory issues that they've had to deal with their Owens Valley supply. So the Colorado River has provided a very important piece of the water supply. And we were joking a little bit before the presentation today about whether, part of my task is trying to make sure we have a full Colorado River aqueduct every year, and I think that is part of what our job is, to ensure that water supply remains secure for the citizens here in Southern California. So, as I mentioned, historically we had been relying on unused apportionment from the other states, and as development occurred in the other states, as Mother Nature decided not to continue the plentiful years on the Colorado River, we have had to reduce uses in California from what had been about 5.3 million acre feet, 5.2 million acre feet to 4.4 million acre feet, our normal apportionment. And as you know, when you're used to relying on a larger number and have to reduce the uses, you have to utilize several different tools. So the water users in Southern California who were using Colorado River water developed what's called the California's 4.4 plan. And over a series of several years came up with some agreements and proposals to try to enable the municipal supplies, the aqueduct supplies, to remain steady and to remain an important source, and also keep in balance with the agricultural users. So the traditional allocations are, majority of the water in California is utilized by agricultural users, and they also have the senior priorities on the Colorado River system. So we have been able to put together agreements amongst the agricultural users and the municipal users to provide for transfers of water from the primarily the Imperial Irrigation District to the Southern California area. There are agreements also in place to purchase water from the Palo Verde Irrigation District, which is has a fallowing program. So Metropolitan Water District pays the irrigation district not to irrigate land, and that creates a water supply savings for the junior municipal users. So California was successful in putting together those programs. They have been in place for over a decade and have been really role models for other states that have had to put together similar types of agreements to try to reduce the overall uses in the areas. And it hasn't been easy, and it hasn't been uncomplicated. There are hundreds of thousands of acre feet that are transferred on an annual basis, and that results in environmental regulations and compliance issues. So significant amounts of time have been associated with those transfers as well. But it has been essential, those agreements have been essential to assuring that we maintain the balance within California and continue to meet our growing needs. So on average, we have utilized over the past 10 years actually less than our annual apportionment, 4.3 million acre feet. And some of that savings has been stored in the Colorado River system and is now providing part of the supply for Metropolitan's supply now, again, when we have the lower allocations on the state water project system. But there's been a significant expense. Our agencies have invested over $2 billion over those 10 years to implement the programs. The state of California has also contributed towards some of the canal lining projects. And over 4 million acre feet have been transferred from the agricultural districts to the municipal areas. But we know those agreements have been essential, and part of our job is to keep them in place. So we have the California agreements that we've worked on. We have similar interstate agreements that we've developed amongst our sister states in the basin, and they have allowed for more flexibility and created more resiliency within the water supplies that we have available. In addition, we have done some creative agreements with Mexico and are hoping to really continue to implement those agreements and expand upon them in the next several years.
Tanya, a quick question. On the banking of water in Lake Mead, I understand MWD does this, but when the reservoir falls below the intake levels in Nevada, for example, now they have to make investments. Who's paying for that? And in the long run, does it really work? Sir.
Yep, great question. Jumping into the details, and I have a couple of slides that'll talk about the current hydrology that we're facing. But I think it's it's the reality of these complex agreements, as that you have to plan ahead for times when because we don't know what the water supply is going to be in any year. So you have to plan ahead for times when you're going to have very high reservoirs and surplus conditions, but also plan for the shortage conditions. And that's what the basin states have done, is develop some rules and guidelines for how to manage this huge, massive system in both scenarios. So we have coordinated operations between the upper basin reservoirs and the lower basin reservoirs. We work on an annual basis to decide how much is going to be released from the upper basin to the lower basin. And then within the lower basin, we have rules and guidelines about how those allocations can be shared. And in times of shortage, we have a priority system on the lower basin, and California has a senior priority. So we want to ensure that that priority system is maintained. And the banking provisions that you were talking about allow California to bank some of the water that we've been able to save through conservation efforts to utilize in times when, like the past 2 years, when we have needed that extra supply. And the other states have recognized that need, and because of the foresight that we had to put those agreements in place, we have rules that allow us to take water out and utilize it, and it's managed on an annual basis by the Bureau of Reclamation. So the real question was, well, what are we going to do if we continue to see dire hydrology? The short answer is that the rules that we have developed have predicted that might be a possibility, and have provided for reduced allocations to Arizona and Nevada. And then ultimately, if we do see the lowest reservoir levels out there, we have said that we are going to get back together. We are going to reconsult on the agreements that we reached and roll up our sleeves and develop some new tools. So we bank on the ability to continue the cooperative agreements that we've had with our other states, and try to get through even what might be some pretty dire years coming ahead. So great transition to the next section of slides. I pulled up the drought monitor map from last week, and you can see that California is definitely in a worse situation than any of our neighboring states, but there is at least some level of drought throughout the Colorado River Basin, and it has been at some level of drought for the past 15 years. But the snowpack there in the slide on the right is really where our water comes from in the basin. So we are snowpack dependent. And unfortunately, we did not have a great year this year. I'll go into a little more detail, but we traditionally have relied on a significant input from those upper basin mountains. We have a tremendous amount of storage on the Colorado River system. We have 60 million acre feet of capacity in both the upper basin and lower basin reservoirs. As of last week, the system was at 48% full, so I can't even say we're glass half full at this point, unfortunately. The the largest reservoir in the upper basin is Lake Powell. It is at 45% of capacity, and Lake Mead, which is almost 100%, I'll say 90% reliant on releases from Lake Powell. So that is a very controlled situation. We have 40% of capacity right now. We've had the driest 15 years on record. So not only has it been a drought for 15 years, but we're now officially the driest period on record. There's a longer record that goes back to tree ring analysis, and it is technically not the driest period that we've seen in that tree ring analysis, but definitely in the lower echelons of that type of situation as well. But we have had, because of the drought situations we had, and through this coordinated management system, we've had, last year we saw the lowest ever release of water from Lake Powell to Lake Mead. And then we've seen Lake Mead getting to its record low levels since the system's been fully developed. So just a graph showing the historical record, and this goes back to 1905. So this is kind of our standard period of 100 and some years of hydrology. You can see it's extremely variable on a year-to-year basis. On average, we see the green line there is the average, which shows a declining trend for our flows. This is the natural flow. Then the red line shows the 15-year average. So you can see over on the left-hand side, starting in about 2000, the general red line is below the green line, so we're below average there, and trending downward. But again, I emphasize the tremendous value of the storage on the Colorado River system. So we started that year 2000 trend at 94% of capacity in our reservoir systems. So thankfully, we had a wet period prior to this current drought and have been able to benefit from that large amount of storage in our system. And this graph shows the Lake Mead storage in blue, which is the lower basin primary source. And then on top of that is the Lake Powell storage. And then in addition to Lake Powell, there are other reservoirs in the upper basin that are utilized to manage the system. So the total storage is shown on the graph.
Lake Powell came online with about 62?
Yep. Lake Mead was first, and then upper basin development has occurred since then. So that's our, as of today, we're at a little below half full in our system storage. And the burning question is, what's next, right? What's going to happen with respect to our snowpack? Well, we started this year with a snowpack. So the slide here shows two pictures. On the right are the current snow conditions in the upper basin, and unfortunately the red and yellow colors are bad for us because they are the below average colors. We'd like to be seeing the blue and purple and green, but we see throughout the basin nothing is, what's the highest number on there? 70? 71? Yeah. 75, the tiny little area where we're currently at 75% of our snowpack. And then the graph on the left shows the trends, which we were at some points during the winter hoping for a normal year, which would be good news, but have, in particular over the past month, received almost no precipitation and have had extremely high temperatures. So that combination has really resulted in a decrease in what we've seen for the projected inflows into Lake Powell. I think the projection as of yesterday was about 52% of average, which is not good. And we lost about 1 million acre feet in terms of the projected amount of water that we were going to be seeing, that the forecasters were going to be seeing into the reservoir. So record temperatures on the high side in the basin. So finally, we're getting to the slide that answers the question about shortages in the lower basin. So the rules and the models and the agreements that we've put into place have thought about these low reservoir conditions, and we have developed some required reductions that will be taken by Arizona and Nevada if we hit those critical elevation levels at Lake Mead. And again, this is based on a predictive system. So we look at the snowpack conditions and we predict forward what the managers think the reservoir levels are going to be as of the next January. And based on those predictions, we would reallocate the water, reduce the allocations to the states if we get there. The current estimates are that we would see a shortage. So this January 1st prediction may indicate the shortage exists in 2016. There is the latest prediction was it was about a 20% possibility in 2016 and moving up to a 50% possibility in 2017. Those predictions may change based on this March forecast that we've seen, but we have tools in place to deal with that first level of shortage, and even the second and third level of shortages, as you can see here, if we see that hydrology develop. Did you have a question, sir?
Yeah, something I've always wondered about, the Powell and Mead kind of work together. Can you talk about the releases and how that works relative to the shortage provision? Because it seems like more releases can be made from Powell into Mead to alleviate hitting that mark, but is that taking water from the upper basin, or how does that work?
Great question, and that is exactly the type of discussion that went on. And when we were working on these interstate agreements, I was actually working on the upper basin side, so have that perspective. But we were balancing. That supply of water to the upper basin, that's their bank account, and they have constituencies and farmers and cities and tribes and environmental needs that they are working to protect, and don't want to over-deliver water to the lower basin. And similarly, in the lower basin, we have all of those same concerns and needs and want to ensure that they're not retaining too much water. So we have a balanced system. We have a coordinated operation system that really takes into consideration what the actual hydrology is in the lower basin, actual hydrology in the upper basin, and the goal is to achieve a balance. So what is an equitable balance between the upper basin and the lower basin? And the rules are very clever, and clever's not the right word, but thoughtful in terms of trying to think about different contingencies. So this year we see, unfortunately, we don't have the snowpack that we had hoped for in the upper basin. So they do not have as much water as we thought they were going to have a month ago. So it changes on a month-by-month basis. So the fact that they have less water coming in means there might be less water delivered from Lake Powell. It's just the reality of what the rules say, what the agreements say about how to interpret the hydrologic reality, hydrologic situation. Sir.
Yeah, I'm curious. I've understood that at elevation 1050, Hoover Dam loses its ability to produce power. I also understand that there's an upgrade going on to the turbines there that should lower that level, but what's the forecast for the completion of that upgrade to lower it below 1,000 feet?
So there are a couple of issues there. As I mentioned, the power production from Hoover Dam is extremely critical to Southern California and other parts of the lower basin. They are undergoing turbine upgrades to make sure that they can produce power at the lower head levels. I know at least 2 of the turbines have been replaced, and I'm sorry, I don't know the exact schedule for the completion of the additional functions there, but they're thinking about that, and they're trying to make sure that they can produce as much power as possible under that variety of hydrologic conditions.
They're already losing some capacity at the dam as it is.
Yep.
And by 2016, they're saying that they'll be down to that 1050 level. And I'm curious, will they, what's the nexus between the power generation and the water level at meet and the upgrade of the generator?
Yep. So they're working on the upgrades. They know there's a direct connection. It's not a mystery at all. It's a real connection there. And I'll get into a little bit more about some of the uses. So the hydropower revenues fund some of the programs that we rely on to keep, for example, the ESA compliance in place on the system. So if the revenues are lower, yes, it affects our power production and our power situation, but it also has trickle-down effects that really resonate throughout almost every aspect of what we do in the basin. So again, just to highlight, these are the anticipated reductions if we do see those lower reservoir levels. We are always hopeful that we will get improved snowpack, but we've had a 15-year decline, so it's going to take several years of improved snowpack to really bring us back up. And just to highlight, we do have an agreement with Mexico that provides if the United States goes into the shortage conditions, Mexico will similarly take reductions in their deliveries. So with that framework of the uncertain hydrology on a year-to-year basis, we have worked consistently to try to develop agreements to make the water supply as secure as possible, and are always thinking about exactly the types of questions that you've been asking. We, most recently, because of the continued drought situation, have been working with our sister states on drought contingency planning. So if we do need to have some additional measures beyond the current agreements, what are they going to be? How can we find some more flexibility in our system? Are there augmentation projects that we can utilize? How can we make the system more efficient on a year-to-year basis? These are the types of agreements that we're working on. We have really come up with some innovative programs to try to incentivize conservation throughout the basin, and most recently have done that for the benefit of the system. So I'm not going to be paying you for water that you would conserve, that you would deliver to me, but it would be water that would be conserved and left in the system for the benefit of all of the water users. So some of those programs are just getting off the ground, but I think they will be a role model for how we continue to go forward in these drought conditions. And they are coordinated on an upper basin and lower basin perspective. We also have long-term planning that is in place. So the drought contingency planning, we're looking at a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year type of a time frame. In the water supply and demand study that was completed a couple of years ago, we are looking out on a 50-year time frame. So what are the long-term supply and demand situations going to be looking like? And the real kind of interesting note is this was a basin-wide planning process, so very high level amongst all 7 states, rolling up our sleeves to try to think about some of these opportunities for additional conservation, water development in the municipal sector, agricultural sector, and acknowledging that the environmental and recreational flows are a key component to the system. And the agreements with Mexico have been pretty innovative. In 2012, we reached what is known as Minute 319. Minutes are the name of the agreements that our government uses to coordinate with the Mexican equivalent on the Colorado River and really try to figure out how to interpret the treaty, essentially. So the most recent minute was a 5-year pilot project where we asked Mexico to consider taking shortages if the U.S. were also in shortage. That prior to Minute 319, that had been an unresolved issue. You know, how were we going to deal with that situation if it came up? So we have an agreement in place. We'll be able to implement that if we do see those low conditions in 2016 or 2017. But we are also working on trying to fund some conservation projects in Mexico that would result in water that could be utilized in the United States, which is something that we hadn't done with them before. And hopefully we'll get those off the ground in the next few years and can do similar projects in the future as well. And then I just want to acknowledge that one of the components of Minute 319 involved an environmental flow to the Colorado River in Mexico, which if you've been down to the Yuma area, you would see that right at the border in Mexico, the United States delivers water in the Colorado River to Mexico, and then the first thing that happens is there's a diversion dam that takes the entire flow of the river to farms and cities and utilizes that allocation within Mexico, which is, you know, their business. But we coordinated with the government of Mexico on a experimental pulse flow release last year to utilize some of Mexico's allocation to re-wet the dry riverbed, and are now in the process of evaluating the habitat and benefits associated with that pulse flow experiment. But it got a lot of attention last year, and again, you know, if you go there today, I was there last week, it's completely dry riverbed at this point. So again, one of the main jobs that I have is interacting with the other Colorado River Basin states on a variety of issues, and recognizing that not only the water quantity issues matter, but also the water quality issues. So the Salinity Control Forum has been in existence since 1974 and has been a basin-wide effort to reduce the salinity, improve the water quality in the basin. So we have essentially efficiency projects in the upper basin, and we have a water treatment facility in the upper basin that has been very successful in capturing and reducing the amounts of salinity in the basin. I think there have been, on an annual basis, just from one facility, 100,000 tons of salt that is removed. And our role is to try to oversee the management of that program, ensure that the federal funding that supports the majority of the work is continued to be there, and that the power generation actually is one of the main funders for this program. So we recognize that impacts to power at Hoover affect funding for this program. So we're thinking about that in a number of ways. And then again, some of the environmental concerns, if you all are familiar with the Grand Canyon as a very important national park for our country. I just noticed in the news clips yesterday that that reach of the river was named as one of the most endangered rivers sections by American Rivers in their annual announcements. A lot of attention and focus on the environmental benefits and values associated with that area, and a complex series of demands. So the primary purpose, primary focus that we concentrate on is the water supply and the power supply. But there are significant recreational interests. We have endangered species issues. We have tribal issues. A variety of pushes and pulls that we need to constantly be evaluating. So we have been involved with our sister states and the federal government on an environmental impact statement process. We should be seeing a draft of that in the next several months, and really trying to advise the Secretary of the Interior how to manage all of those competing issues. And then focusing on in our lower basin reaches, we have in place a Lower Colorado River Multi-Species Conservation Program. Earlier this week, I was in Yuma and I was celebrating the 10th anniversary of this program. It's really a role model as well for how to balance the environmental concerns, the endangered species concerns, and comply with the laws. Essentially, it provides compliance to the water and power generation that we have on the Lower Colorado River. So without this program, we would have less security and less certainty with respect to those supplies. So it's been a great success. And we had a nice celebration, had the Commissioner of Reclamation there, and Lower Colorado River region folks there, really hoping to continue that program into the future as it has been successful in the past decade. And then really what we do on a day-to-day basis is work with our state counterparts to implement these rules, these agreements that we have. So the balancing of reservoirs between the upper basin and the lower basin, ensuring that the agreements we have in place are going forward, and complying with the Supreme Court decree that tells us how to do our accounting. So looking forward, we have uncertain hydrology, potential for shortages, hydropower impacts, reductions in flexibility, water quality impacts. We're aware that there's a lot to be thinking about, but we know we need to continue cooperation. We need to continue implementation of the agreements that we have within California, the agreements that we have for coordinated operation with the other states. And then, this contingency planning that we're doing now to try to develop even additional items and additional tools. So I wrapped it up. Thanks.
2 years ago, came up with the agreement that there's 15 million acre feet on the Colorado River. Now the evidence is around 12 million feet lowering. Are you going to change the allocation to other lower basins? to get me along.
Do we want to reopen the compact, right? I think the I think the reality is that we have tools in place to deal with a variable supply. So the upper basin states have a percentage allocation amongst themselves that's tied to the actual available supply. On the in the lower basin, we have a firm allocation to each state, but we have the knowledge and the awareness that we might not have that full allocation. So we have thought about how are we going to reduce uses if we need to.
Real clear as long as we get the whole Colorado River right.
And yep. So I think from California's perspective, we need to really be thinking about how to protect our interests on the river and try to work cooperatively with our other states, but maintain that important supply that we have.
You mentioned the 50-year plan. Is that something that's complete? And if so, you mentioned hope a lot, but what's that planning looking like, and what's the realities if we truly are going into that steady decline?
So the long-term planning, the long-term analysis looked at potential demand increases and then potential supply variability, and the result was there would likely be an imbalance if we did not have additional programs in place, if we did not reduce the demands or increase the supplies. So we've thought about ways to do both. Are there system efficiency projects that we can put in place that would essentially result in increased supply? Is there additional conservation that we can do to decrease demand? And the combination of those two is really what water managers do on a daily basis, of trying to plan ahead for contingencies and think about ways to better manage that resource.
Okay, Tanya, can you stick around for a few
Yep.
minutes? Okay, I know there's other questions, but thank you for the great presentation. You've sort of closed the loop for us on water supplies to Southern California, the metropolitan service area. We had a presentation on state water project water supplies almost every meeting. And then we have a representative from the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power to talk about that supply. Now you've closed the loop on the Colorado River, so we all have a great perspective of what the issues are and ability to more truly understand all these complexities. I for one didn't realize there was all these issues on the Colorado River. So,
It's sobering. I mean, it's humbling and sobering, really. The situation that we're facing, not only within California but on the Colorado River, and really appreciate the professional folks that are out there working there. The metropolitan folks in particular have their sleeves rolled up and are fully engaged on all of the issues on the Colorado River and really trying to look for ways to protect that critical supply.
Bottom line is, I was talking to one of the other people in attendance here. One of these days we'll have a presentation that doesn't have a lot of negativity to it. We talked about the drought conditions on all the water supplies. We talked about if we don't cut back, we're going to face big fines. So we're going to have to try and have a more positive presentation. So anyways, we have an addition to our group. It's nice seeing AG again. You might recall when we talked about agricultural water use issues in California and the drought, AG was one of our presenters at that time. Thank you for joining us today. And seems like the governor has a strong favor towards the agricultural industry, which should be good for you people.
We're hoping it stays that much.
Okay, so very good. So if you have more questions or want to talk to Tanya, she's agreed to stay around. So you have a good day, and we'll see you in another month.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye.